Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Road Back Home podcast. This week, I have a very interesting conversation to begin what I hope will be a much bigger conversation over time on a subject that is a very personal one for me. It is on the topic of our relationship with our bodies, with food, with eating, and ultimately as a reflection of our relationship in general with ourselves, with reality, with the world. You know, it is, I've come to realize, a relational issue that plays out on the field that is food, eating, body. My guest this week is Jacqueline Campion from the Marino Therapy Center in Dublin. This is a conversation that I hope will serve as an opening into something bigger. My own experience with recovery in this domain has been ongoing for about 15 years. And the reason that I wanted to talk to Jacqueline and to have the Marino Therapy Center there for my very first, say, conversation of, I hope, many on this topic is because, 15 years ago is where my, the seed of my own recovery in this area was planted, was through having come across Marino Therapy Center. This episode is, it's not supposed to serve as a standalone one conversation does the trick kind of offering. It is a conversation that is, say, just one of many that this topic is worthy of, and which this topic demands. I'm 8 years sober from alcohol, a little less than that from nicotine, but still many years sober from those two substances. I have a lot of recovery work under my belt. A lot of transformation has happened. This is the one area that is my Everest. It is the one that is always has and is and continues to prove the most challenging for me, the most difficult, the most baffling, the most frustrating, the most painful, confusing, all of the things. It is not an easy one. Please do mind yourself as you listen to this. If it is as emotionally charged an area for you as it has been for me, take good care of yourself. I'm absolutely open to hearing your perspective on this, or your questions if you have any in the comments, and whether they are in the comments on Spotify, on Apple, on Substack, wherever they are. I do encourage you to interact with us on this. And I'm excited for you to hear from Jacqueline. Thanks for listening. Jacqueline Campion, I am so happy that you're here. Welcome and thank you for being here.
Thank you very much, Amanda. I just mentioned it briefly, we were talking, but yeah, I feel very privileged when someone you admire invites you on for a conversation. It's a cool feeling that I've kind of just been letting sink in. So yeah, I'm happy to be here, and hopefully hopefully I can express what I want to in this conversation. So yeah, thank you for inviting me.
I feel a kinship with you and also with Marie, who's your mom, because the Marino Therapy Center has actually been quite a big part of my journey of recovery. And I, I was kind of I was visiting your podcast and the website in anticipation of this conversation. And it was just like, oh my God, I have integrated so much of that learning into my perspective, let's say, my worldview on recovery, And so I want to thank you for that work that you have been doing for 30 years now. Isn't that right?
Yeah, well, that's just really lovely to hear. I just think it's always so cool to hear like when people are connecting and resonating with the work that we do and how we do it, because I suppose for a while and sometimes in like lots of different ways it can feel like to approach recovery and freedom the way that Marino does, for sometimes it can kind of almost, I know myself when I started my recovery process, I thinking, oh, this sounds a little bit woo woo. But when you hear actually that it connects and it resonates, and when you integrate it, the impact and the power it has, it never gets old to really hear how when you apply this stuff in real time, like the results are there, they're, yeah, the results are there. So it's cool. And yeah, so 30 years. So I haven't actually been working in the area for 30 years, but my mom, as you mentioned, Marie Campion, so she found a Marino Therapy Center. That would be over 35 years back in 1991. And I have been working in the center for over, touching on maybe 16 years now. So we are a family run center. And my dad, Jerry, is normally people's first point of contact when they pick up the courage to pick up the phone or send an email. So yeah, it's been an incredible journey, starting off watching my mom build the business and build the center and see how it has evolved. I suppose like it sounds a bit strange, but I sometimes like I feel like I've kind of grown up in a therapy center, which obviously lands a bit, it depends who you're talking to, but I really feel like I've grown up in that. And I've gone through different stages thinking I'll never work in this area for lots of different reasons, through my own personal experiences and professionally. But yeah, what a mentor to have in Marie Campion,
Yes.
So yeah, it's been a colorful journey for sure.
Oh, do you know, it's another level that I relate to you, Jacqueline, in that like the generational, we are born into a legacy, yourself through your mother and me through my dad and also Jerry and my mother Eileen through, the legacy of helping people, just
Mm,
like understanding. And what I also love about the approach of the Marino Therapy Center is that the bringing humanity to the table and spotlighting the humanity underneath the distress, and
yeah,
and allowing somebody to reclaim a sense of their humanity, because as we know, disordered eating, distressed eating, and we'll get into definitions in a minute,
yeah,
they are so eradicating, they just eviscerate any sense of self that you have,
yeah,
and so cruel and so self-attacking and shaming. And anyone in the grips of it has has lost that, has lost a sense of who they are as a human being underneath it all.
yeah,
And so, I really do see us as, we have parents who never lost sight of that humanity, and who, through their work, whether it is through entertainment or therapy, which,
yeah,
are connecting with that humanity again and helping a person feel who they are,
yeah.
and what brings them to life. Would you agree?
Yeah, totally. And there's so many words even that you've mentioned there, like as you said, even like with the legacy and like the power of that. And I think, I think that's a really cool word to actually even think about. And especially nowadays when so many people feel lost and disconnected from their sense of self. And it's like, what is it you want to leave behind and what you want to practice? And as you mentioned, like both, with our parents, and especially when you're talking about like with your dad and my mom, it's like the courage it took to continue to hold on to the point that this all comes back down to humanity. Because when you're dealing with different, and we're talking about terminology, but I wouldn't use the words disordered a
Hmm.
lot, but when if you're talking about distresses and disorders or whatever behaviors are manifested that cause harm onto self, that as you said, like feeling lost, what came up for me when you talk about like feeling like you've lost that, it's like, and you become disconnected from that, the courage it takes to hold on to the hope that this all comes back down to the humanity. And I think now, And that's one thing I've really learned as an observer of of my parents and their work, and especially that driving force of my mom is because it's challenged, and I've seen it aggressively being challenged over the years in lots of different ways.
Mm.
And it's just like now more than ever, universally, which is, I think such a reflection of even what's happening internally and kind of connected of like how important it is to one acknowledge the power of holding on to hope. And it's actually, there's no such thing as false hope. The ego sees it as something to be naive and to be laughed at, and to hold on to the hope and that that humanity, that connection. I think so much of what the world is needing is really to kind of reconnect to these simple things, and especially with all the different types of self-harming behaviors. So much of it, as you said, is coming back to that humanity and reconnecting with it, and like and who we are underneath it all. Because when the behaviors come in, and you're talking about food and the body, or wherever they're, but I know specifically we're speaking about maybe like food in the body and whatever way that kind of is manifesting. As when they come in, it's very challenging. If you don't have experience or understanding, it's very challenging not to get blindsided by just the
Yes.
sheer pain and horror. And like, it is very frightening to see how it's hard to get your head around. Thankfully, not everybody thinks the way someone with an eating distress thinks, and that could be very powerful when you're like, how do you get your head around how this can happen? But when you pair it all back and you practice and you see those glimmers of the real person and the humanity, it's holding on to the hope with that. And I think it's really cool to hear you say the word legacy, because there's so much more power in that than I would think, even when my mom started off, that she would have even realized what she was doing and how she's doing it. Um, so yeah, I've just gone off on a complete tangent there, but the humanity is just, I think we
Yeah.
really need to be asking ourselves about what that means for us and what that looks like when we're connecting
Mm.
with it and practicing it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is refreshing too, because what we know is that when we look through the lens of the medical model, we are looking at pathology, we're looking at the behaviors, we're looking at all of the, whether it is the eating, whether it is the body, whether it is the food, it is quite othering and objective. Like it objectifies, because it's not a food problem, it's not a weight problem, and it's not a body problem, it's not an eating problem, it's a human problem. And it is a human suffering, and
Hmm.
there's, to address it on the other layers, like it has to be addressed on all of the layers, but to address it on all of the layers with the exception of the human underneath, and teaching somebody to reconnect with their humanity, I think is a massive disservice. And I think probably something that, unless you've had experience with this approach to recovery, recovery might feel like just more othering, more, how do we fix this problem that is you,
Yeah.
as opposed to how do we help how do we all how do we do the showing up in spite of all the burden of all of this.
Yeah.
So if I think probably to go back in time, I'll just share very briefly, and then I'll hand it over to you, Jacqueline, to kind of like tell us more about the Marino Therapy Center. But I'll share very briefly how I came into contact with the Marino Therapy Center. It was 2009, I believe, and my first marriage was falling apart. And my big thing, I mean, I was what? I was 2009, I was 34. And, I was probably 28 years. I don't know if I did that math correctly, but from the age of 6, at that point, thinking that every single thing that went wrong in my life was because I was unlovable. Right. And I also believed that I was unlovable because I didn't have my shit together, in the sense that I was always fat. I was always dieting, or the weight. It was all like I rested my entire, like, yeah, I am unlovable. And one of the reasons I'm unlovable is that I'm unsightly.
you know? And so, and also then because of all the turmoil that I did not have language for at the time, basically I'm the problem. And so my marriage was falling apart, and I had booked us into a couples therapy session only to realize that I didn't want it to work at this point. I'd overshot the runway. But anyway, after that, I Googled something like, therapy for, and I don't know what words I would have used. I don't know if, because I did not identify as somebody with, whether we call it eating disorder, distress, we'll get into the terminology. Of course, I didn't know about eating distress at the time. So if I was Googling that, it would have been eating disorder, but I don't think I would have because I didn't identify. So I was something about, how to, I was looking for a therapist to fix this eating problem that I thought I had. And it put me in touch with a therapist in Limerick, which is local to where I live. And I went to see her, and she was an affiliate counsellor. I don't know if that's what you call them, with the Marino Therapy
Yes.
Center. And so
Yeah.
she introduced me to the Marino Therapies approach. And she also introduced me to the idea of just eating distress, psycholinguistics. She introduced me to the idea of it being a condition. Very much was tending to the human in the room, which was very different for me. Was very encouraging of my creativity, invited that into the room, which was also very, very different for me and a game changer. And she gave me Marie's book, and the book is called Hope.
Mhm.
And in that book, I read about what I now know as self erasure. When I showed up at that therapist's door, and she was like, what is what do you think is the problem? What do you think is wrong? And my words were, I would say it's low self-esteem, but low self-esteem would be an improvement on where I'm at. Because I feel like wherever self-esteem is supposed to be in a person, not only is it missing in me, but there seems like a deficit. There's something else there that is like the opposite of self-esteem. And through
Mm.
reading Marie's book, and in the 15 years since, because this is an ongoing journey for me. I know that Marino therapy advocates for full recovery. I do not, I have not achieved, and I use the word achieved, and it's not an achievement. I have not realized full recovery, you know, um, but we'll talk about what that means. So that is how I came into contact. And I learned through that book that basically the entire thing here is I don't believe that I deserve to take up an ounce of space in this
Yeah.
world.
Yeah.
Will you take it from there and tell me, or like tell us about that?
Yeah, and I think it actually is very important to even kind of start with that point and even work backwards on it because I really have a strong sense. I really believe in a lot of lightness when it comes to recovery and freedom, but the pain, and I have goosebumps when I speak about it, the level of pain, it's challenging to explain to somebody that low self-esteem is an improvement. If you're looking at zero, people talk about, and I think that just sums it up beautifully, because you don't realize how small you are playing. And as you said, that self-erasure, like you literally to disappear, it feels like a relief because, as you said, we don't have the language. You're working with people who are hypersensitive without often the realization of it. And hypersensitivity is it's like magic. It's an incredible gift. But if you aren't aware of it or don't know how to, it's incredibly powerful. So it needs boundaries. It needs like learning how to actually use it and connect it and get it working for you. But if we don't have that in place, you are like an open field of absorbing not just a lot of absorbing a lot of unhelpful things that are going on in the world, far beyond, the front door of your home or even, family or anything like that. It's like, it's very challenging. So the pain, you're experiencing things on a much deeper level. And I think with the eating distress, and why we refer to it as an eating distress as opposed to an eating disorder from our experiences, we've disordered, and a lot of time when you're working with people, there's nothing wrong with you. We often just think that there's something wrong with us. We're not disordered. There is a distress that is eating the person, and with the DSM-5 and the psychiatric manuals that just continue to gather pages and pages on disorders and really kind of saying what's wrong. It's all information. It's all information, and how we meet that information is absolutely crucial in terms of what comes from that as a result in terms of our experience. And I think when it comes to, and we've come a long way, but my God, we still have so far to go when it comes to the understanding, not just understanding eating distress, but understanding the freedom and the recovery from it, and what actually helps and what doesn't. Because especially in Ireland, we're great from going from one extreme to the other. It's like we suppress so much, and then we've gone to the other extreme where we're just like, let it all out. And it's such a confusing space to be in. So it's again, it comes back to understanding that this is so much more. The food, the body isn't the problem. It's a solution to an underlying, and I wouldn't even use the word issue. I would say it's an underlying distress, discomfort, and it is a lot of the time unbearable pain. And it's multifaceted. It's not just from, we're often saying, if I get, the way that we would often work is, it's not always asking why all the time. When you are in the depths of the behavior, it's like digging at the roots of a plant that won't grow. It's great for the ego of the researcher, but it's not so great for the plant. Now, there is a time and place for exploring the past, and it's multifaceted. But when you've got hypersensitivity, and you mentioned the word, Amanda, fear, the fear, we need to come back down to actually just the simplicity of acknowledging the choices we're making from a place of love or fear. And the conditioning, I would refer to the conditioning of the mind, the eating distress. It's like a regime. It's like a dictator within your head. And you can see how connected it is to what we're experiencing in the world. There is such a rise in right-wing politics, dictatorship, because a lot of the time, I bet you talk about belonging, a sense of self. Who are we? A fear. It's like you go against your body because we're turned against one another, as opposed to actually understanding what needs to happen on different levels. The holistic approach to, and there's just so much with it. So when there is behaviors around food in the body, it is far greater than, it runs a lot deeper. It's the relationship with oneself and the world around them, as opposed to the relationship even with food in the body. That's just a reflection of the other, really.
It is relational at its roots, isn't it? It's not an isolated, it did not occur in a vacuum.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. It's there's so many different factors to it, and I think ultimately it is about learning about ourselves, how we're showing up in the world, how we want to show up in the world, and even acknowledging that it could be an option for us to show up in the world like that, because the condition is going, who do you think you are? And you're like, yeah, great question. If you actually change the tonality of that question, it could be quite powerful, as opposed to chronically critical like that just keeps you in a not so merry-go-round.
And also with the ultimate goal of trying to make yourself small again,
Yeah,
small,
yeah,
safe. We have equated smallness with safety. I know
yeah.
I have. Um, Something that I think that that I really do want to get across the airwaves here is an experience that I had when it was proposed to me that this was what I was up against, was, you know, that it was. I keep struggling to say it because I'm conscious of my language, but I'm going to use the language that I would have been using at the time: an eating
Yeah.
disorder, or disordered
Mm.
eating, or even eating distress. Coming into
Mm-hmm.
being invited into this world, because again, you work, the Marino Therapy Center and your affiliate therapists, they work, of course, one to one, but also group work is a big part of recovery. And
Yeah.
so when I was invited into group work, I had the experience of, once again, the unworthiness. I don't belong here. I don't belong here. I don't qualify. And so long, Jacqueline, that I, you know, recovery, and even with alcohol, I think it's so worthy to talk about the gray area here, because it's almost like this dictator in our head also has this idea of, well, you must, you know, to qualify for assistance or recovery, you must be struggling in this very specific way that
Yeah.
looks like a very specific thing. And I know that I sat in that room, and I sat there, and my mind, my distress did or I should say the condition did what it does best, which is sat there, looked at everyone else and said, "You're the odd one out here. You're the only one. In fact, you're failing to have an eating disorder because you're the only fat one here." You know?
Mm.
Now, by the way, my mind will say that to me whether or not I am fat. So, and I use the word fat as a
Yeah.
reclamation, because I'm not tippy-toeing around that word anymore,
Yeah.
and I don't mean it,
Yeah.
in terms of like, nobody needs to rescue me from the word fat anymore.
Yeah.
But that is something that, so for people here who are listening, who are like, no, this doesn't apply to me specifically because I'm not successful controlling my weight, like, or
Yeah.
somebody. And why is it that it felt like I had envy, Jacqueline? How ill can a mind get
Yeah.
that I would sit in a room with people who are in not only great pain, but grave danger,
Yeah.
and actually feel hatred and envy towards them because they're doing something that I wish I could do? That was where my mind was back then.
Yeah.
I had
Yeah.
shame for even being in the room.
Yeah. Absolutely. And what comes like the virus of the stress and the not good enough syndrome, it adapts in order to survive. So, whatever space you go, and the more you learn about it, the more you realize it's just same shit, different day. The unworthiness just follows you around, or the lack of belonging, or the shame, like that we're different to the rest, and these belief systems that go in. And it comes back to the idea of like, and again, and I'm really glad you brought up the value, not just the value of thinness, but the value of sickness. And when you don't know who you are, and it takes a long time. A lot of people are quite reluctant to actually express and own their experiences, like even with the value of sickness or the value of. So that's just even something that came to mind of like, that's
What do you mean the
information you don't
value?
know who. Let's say, for example, that you actually wish you were more unwell. Like your bloods might be coming in okay that week. Let's say you got blood work done, and let's say Jacqueline there beside you, as her bloods are in her boots. Like there's nothing, there's no estrogen happening, there's no registering, and you actually, part of you are like wish, you're raging when actually the NCT comes back, and you're like, this is actually looking okay. When we don't
So
we
you're
want
talking about
when we don't know.
qualifiers.
Yeah.
Qualifiers. Yeah.
Now, I wouldn't use that word. So now, but when you say qualifiers, just for clarity, as in
Yeah.
what qualifies.
So it's almost like, yeah, so what I'm seeing, I think what we're getting to here is what you're saying here about the isolating nature of this disease that keeps me from
Yeah,
belonging. And one of the ways
yeah,
it does that is it shows me all the ways I don't qualify to
yeah,
belong here. And
yeah,
one of those ways is that your bloods came back normal. Another way is that your weight you're actually overweight, not underweight, because for some reason, there is more virtue in the starvation manifestation, that
mm-hmm,
manifestation of food stuff going on, you
mm-hmm,
know.
mm-hmm,
So that's how I would kind of see that. It's almost like, and that's how it operates and has operated in me, is the brain is constantly disqualifying me from being part of the thing I so desperately want and need.
yeah. And there's something that actually comes up when you're speaking about that as well, about even the worthiness of connecting with support, and how do you actually qualify for that? And anybody that's listening. And one thing I don't know how helpful, people often talk about the spectrum of disordered eating. And from my experiences working with people, the way that the condition can also actually even translate this is that we have, again, it's a fancier, more kind of intellectual way of saying like, how bad is it? And it's not that bad. And again, that plays into the narrative. So this idea of like spectrum from disordered eating to eat, how do you know it's an eating disorder? disorder, it actually is just really fueling it. So anybody that's say, look, it's not that bad. It's not like, and it again comes back to comparison and all these symptoms as a result of not being worthy. So anyone that is listening, if you are experiencing distress, discomfort, self-doubt, overthinking, when it comes to, your body or food, or you're just even your experience within your body, if you feel claustrophobic within it, if you don't feel safe within it, if you don't feel safe or secure around certain foods, whether that be the texture of them or the color of them or the amount of them, that's okay. It's like, how lost do you have to be
Yes.
until you ask for directions? And it's like, when
Yes.
anytime I'm walking through a woods, or if I'm going around and kind of going, okay, now I'm at a point where I'm a little bit confused and it's causing me a bit of discomfort. Now I'm going to ask for somebody. Whereas before I would have been doubting that. Keeping it simple. If you are, and this spectrum of disordered eating, I'd love to put it in the bin, because I actually don't know if it's helping people with personal experiences. I feel like it's almost a fear tactic as well, because so many people are, and a lot of the time even in professional spaces, afraid of eating disorders, and there's so much fear around it, and it's a very, very serious situation to be in. And that's the thing, we can take something serious without all that scaremongering behind it as well. So anyone listening, if you feel a little bit uncomfortable with body and food, or whether that's just even public or anything like that, keep it simple. Don't analyze it. Inquire about something. It's like if you're working on your house, don't overthink it. If you want to get a quote for somebody, call up a tradesperson, see if they're available, and see what the vibe is. Keep it simple. You don't have to commit to it too much, and that's one thing. This spectrum of disordered eating and eating disorders, I would just put it in the bin and just keep it simple. Don't overanalyze it and explore it.
Mm. And believe yourself, isn't it? Believe
Yeah.
yourself. You're just like, are you just like bit fucking freaked out by this? Believe that. Like, can
Just
that just be enough?
Yes, and even with that, what if that was just enough? Just, as you said, just cool the
Yeah.
jets for a minute. Keep it to practice and trust in yourself. And there's a cool question. What if I was trusting myself? What would the next step I'd be making here? Would I actually make that call? Would I send an email? What if I was trusting myself? So play with it, because yes, it can be challenging, but we can go down an almighty rabbit hole. You wait until the day you think you deserve this shit, and I tell you, you know,
Yeah.
be a long time.
Yeah. And that voice will always talk you out of it. I am intentionally trying to reach with my words now, the person who's like, this doesn't apply to me, not to
Yeah.
convince you that you have a problem when you don't, but I want to really reach the person who is disqualifying themselves on the basis of whatever. And this doesn't just happen in the, so this happens to me when I try and, so I go on the radio, and then the voice is like, but you don't belong on the radio. Well, who gives a shite what you have to say? So like this,
Yeah.
it's a constant disqualifying voice that will
Yeah.
try and tell you that you don't, um, you just don't qualify for whatever the thing is, the good
Mm-hmm.
thing is that would bring relief.
Mm-hmm.
And like you've just said, to parrot what you've just said, there is this kind of a thing, and it's the same with the alcohol. Like, it doesn't have to be that bad.
Mm-hmm.
Impact, if it's impacting at all in a negative way, that is enough,
Yeah.
and you're allowed to believe yourself, and you are allowed to access the supports. They're not earmarked only for and I think that's probably the danger of not the danger, but that's where the DSM and the medical model is kind of shitty, because it is a qualifying, you have to tick all the boxes. And if you don't tick certain boxes, well, then we can't really give you this label, because, you only got 5 out of 10. It's the same with fucking BMI bullshit. It's like, 39 to 40 or whatever, or weight, at what specific weight do I become quote unquote healthy?
Mm-hmm.
Like I've had so many arguments, Jacqueline, over this with doctors and everything, and they'd be like, "Oh, you're slightly
Mm.
over whatever," and I'd be like, "Yeah, but at what specific? Like, is it so? Am I obese at 40, and then 39.9 I'm not anymore? What is it? Like, it makes no sense." Anyway, here I go off on a rant. The other thing I want to speak to, and also from my own experience, is this idea of distress and eating distress, and what I learned through being introduced to this concept through the Marino Therapy Center. And I'm specifically, again, trying to speak to the person to whom this applies, in that nothing bad has to have happened in your life for you to end up with this condition or conditioning. You don't have to have any kind of big trauma in your life. Nothing has to have happened. Nothing has to have gone wrong. I remember looking up the the idea of distress, and basically it is an accumulation of stress, you know? And I think that in this day and age, the relationship, so again, relationally speaking, stress is normalized and probably even glorified to a point where the accumulation of it alone is driving behaviors that cause us distress through the distress. Would you agree?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Like when you're speaking about that, about even the different behaviors and an accumulation of stress and eating the stress and the conditioned thinking, it's like a hyper capitalist mindset, like an extreme version of it. It's never satisfied. It's always about more, and it drives you to do really stressful things and promises you some reward at the end of it, but it actually just feeds into, again, this not so merry-go-round in terms of like. And it comes back to when you talk about stress, when you're like, some people are born with they have more natural boundaries in place, and there's things not getting in. When you have, normally anybody that you're experiencing, eating distress, there is a hypersensitivity there. And so this is, as you said, like, this is developing on a subconscious level very, very slowly. And you're absorbed. We live in a world that, as you said, and again, we've come a long way, but we have, I think I think we sometimes think we've come further than we have, and it can be a little bit blindsided. We need to keep tapping into it a little bit more and being honest with ourselves, and the values, like, that's really, they're the values of the sails of your ship. But this productivity, this I'll be good enough when, these automatic assumptions of like what successful looks like, what good looks like, what healthy looks like, all these definitions. It's so important. Recovery and freedom is all about introducing respectful questioning, and building assertiveness as opposed to, aggression. But absolutely, like, acknowledging and bringing awareness to what is making us feel heavy or light, because it's like a game of buckaroo. It's all these little silent things they're getting in without our awareness. And that, again, awareness, acceptance, action. Slowly, it's safe to explore this. It's safe to explore what's making you feel heavy or light, what's pushing your buttons. It's not about good, bad, wrong, or right, and really moving from that language of judgment and more the language of description, and you mentioned creativity earlier on. ED is pretty black and white and pretty boring in terms of, even, it's now, some of the behaviors are pretty colorful eventually, but then they kind of get a bit, they don't tend to veer too much. But getting more colorful with the language that we're using. Our language is so black, white, good, bad, and it gives to this very flat, empty experience, disconnection, and then that feeds into more behaviors. So I've gone off on one there, so hopefully that made some sense of what I'm saying.
But see, this is the thing. We're both so passionate and experienced, I guess, in this. We both have a lot to say, and it's a very nuanced thing,
Yeah.
and it's a shapeshifter too. I find
Yes.
in that, like, that it is a very cunning. It is very cunning in how it finds ways to present itself as a good idea, and then there are entire industries built and reliant on us listening to that and making an authority of the voice that's like, whatever the fucking thing is right now, And so, like, there are other cultures, like diet culture is running alongside this, feeding off it like a little parasite, and diet culture is even morphing into health culture, and 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 it's kind of the same wolf just changing its sheep's clothing all the time. And the other thing as well is that I wanted to just to finish off the bit about stress. There is whether it well, it must be out there because it ended up I internalized it a narrative. Once again the shame for being sensitive to stress. I don't have a very high tolerance for stress, and I thought that was a personal weakness or fault. Let's normalize having a fucking limit.
Yeah.
And actually owning it and taking action at that limit and not trying to, the buckaroo thing, like you said, just weigh it down, weigh it down, weigh it down. And then, eating like a mad person at night and upsetting yourself with this, with all of the eating that you're doing, thinking that you're just out of control, you're just weak. So it's more weakness on top of weakness, and completely losing sight of the fact that you had a limit, and culture somehow has conditioned and convinced you to not get off at the exit that is home for you. It is conditioned you to keep on going like the fucking donkey you are, and get off at the next 3 exits down, because that's what that's what boss babes do. But anyway, the pendulum. I want to give some time to this fucking pendulum, because the pendulum I swung from. So I was very, very enmeshed in diet culture. Diet culture and the distress that caused in my life catapulted me over into the anti-diet space, right? Which I thought was my savior for a while. Only to find that they are just as dogmatic over there. And I got shamed over there for not just accepting, like I was very, very distressed over the way that I was eating. And I was distressed over the effect on my body. And even more than cosmetically speaking, because I noticed on your website you have the banners of the positive affirmations, and I love your positive affirmations on Instagram. I will put all the links to your Instagram and your website, of course, in the show notes. But one of the banners I saw is your body is an instrument, not an ornament. And I've read that book, More Than a Body is the book. And what a great concept. Your body is an instrument, not an ornament. But I was treated like somebody who was ornamentalizing my body. I got shamed, basically, just in short, over there in the anti-diet space. I wasn't allowed express my distress over the eating that I was doing that was not with gusto. I wasn't eating out of, like pleasure, and I wasn't enjoying myself. And then the impact that my body was going through, or just the collateral damage of that distress, physically speaking, there was no space held for that in the anti-diet space. So have you experience with the anti-diet space, or something to say about it?
Yeah, I think again, what I mentioned earlier on, I think it's really refreshing to even hear about your experience, because again, it's almost like it sounds radical to actually kind of express your experience of anti-diet. You going from extremes, and as I said, like the sweet spot is somewhere in the middle. And we are a wonderful, like that going from this anti, even the word anti, like for me personally, and as someone who would have throughout my own recovery process, I would have moved into that anti lands for me, like anger. But anger is more like a resentment. Anger is a
Yes.
really powerful emotion, and a really cool precursor for change. But the resentment and blame is transferring your pain onto somebody else. And yes, there's certain cultures and there's things in place that don't help all the time and don't help speed up a recovery. But, and this is from the beauty of like experience of working with people on a daily basis, is that, you're talking about we can experience freedom even within these conditioned cultures. And how do you protect your freedom and your peace when we live in quite a conditioned world? And this, that you there was something you posted before of saying like Instagram is no longer a fun or safe space for me. And when I heard you, when I read you sharing that, like that really summed up, I would feel exactly the same way, because this is so nuanced. And when you share something, you can feel it. You can feel it in the wings of somebody waiting. And I can personally really relate to that, because I would have been like that, listening to things and how people spoke about even eating disorders. My identity was so tied up with different things. And even for a time, my identity was tied up in ED recovery. So if anyone was speaking about it or in a certain way that I didn't agree with, I'd be,
Oh, yes.
how I could, and I'd be coming out in a sweat if somebody was on the radio talking about it and it was a language or terminology I didn't agree with. And it's, and your ego and your identity is just, and again, it comes back to the who are we, and what does freedom actually look like? And this anti-movement, it's, can we be, instead of even like, it's like anti-war, it's like
Hmm.
pro peace, like working towards or for something, because there, it's understanding and bringing awareness to when that energy, that anger is maybe more of resentment, and how empowered you feel. Are you feeling small again? And as someone who would have really went to another extreme of being like a doormat to being like, well, I'll tell you, no one's going to be saying anything. Yeah, I think we need to really bring awareness to these anti spaces, and kind of bringing something down in order to bring something else up. And
Yeah.
15, 20, like I would have definitely, I've experienced it, so I couldn't even judge even if I wanted to.
Yeah. It it's what I discovered, to my horror. Now, I did learn some useful things over there. I absolutely did. However, I also, my experience of it was that it was yet another opportunity to externalize an authority, and I was marching to the beat of a drum once again that wasn't mine. You
Yeah.
can't say this. You can't say that. You have to do this. You can't want to, intentional weight loss is a bad thing. Like, you can't and you can, and all of that. Like, and also I found that it was a very us and them experience.
Yeah.
I was
Yeah.
basically being asked to pick a side.
Mm,
And it was a side on which I can't fucking win.
mm,
There are no, like, if it comes to picking a side, I'm screwed either way. And there was no recovery in that space for me either, because
mm-hmm.
what was, there was a very certain way of showing up that was allowed, and there was a way that was not. So once again, that is a fragmented humanity. That's like, there is a certain amount of your humanity that's welcome here, and the rest of it can fuck off. The rest of it we will shame the minute it shows up here. And that to me was equally damaging.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was kind of like cast out again to the wolves. I was like, oh, um, and and but that it's been part of the journey for me. It's a little bit like, I don't know why this has popped into my mind, but the story, and I'm not religious at all, but the story of, when Jesus was getting born or whatever, the night, and it was like there was no room at the inn anywhere,
Mm-hmm.
you know? It was kind of like that. It was just like, there I was, you know, pregnant on a donkey, wanting to give birth to my recovery, and there was no room at the inn anywhere. It was just shut fucking doors everywhere I went. And I guess, the space, it's where's the manger kind of a
Yeah.
thing. So maybe recovery is kind of like a manger. It's just this bleeding shed that you come across at some point
Yeah.
that you take shelter in, and it doesn't belong to anybody else. You just kind of like make your own home in there, and you welcome, your own life. But you're not alone, because all the animals out there, and the whatever. I don't know why I went so deep into that analogy, but I think it kind of works, in terms of a metaphor.
Yeah, and I think when you're even describing that, it's like, again, it's coming back to the word qualifiers that you used earlier on, like, and bringing awareness to, are we just kind of changing up the dictatorship from a Stalin to a Hitler? Like, do we feel safe? Are there qualifiers? Are there conditions? And it all comes back to actually checking in, and that you're left very vulnerable when you're like, this is, it's so important to learn about yourself, and like, what I'm fascinated. The cult mentality, like ED is a cult, right? And it's you're going to get a lot of information from language about whether there is a freedom and there is a democracy there, or there is conditions and there are qualifiers and there shoulds and there have tos and there needs tos. And at the end of the day, even when you speak about even the manger, like that connection, that intimacy is ultimately with ourselves, that relationship with ourselves, that sense of safety and security with ourselves. Because when you feel safe within yourself, then that permeates, then, as you said, that you feel safer in a space. A lot of freedom is it's like walking into a room and you're not thinking, this belonging. I think so much of this about belonging, loneliness, and a disconnect with ourselves. When you're feeling enough, when you're feeling worthy, that whole idea of whether you belong or not melts. You don't outsource that as a decision. You get to decide whether this is the space that is for you or for not, or not. And there's just something so sacred in that. And there is something within that manger and sacred and connection. Because as you said, like, because there's so much loneliness and disconnect, we are looking to different communities, and communities are really powerful and so cool. And that's all part of connecting. But it's a really cool way when you go into kind of like groups or community, get curious about what comes up for you and kind of what buttons are getting pushed, or whether you're going to the other side and thinking, wow, I've found it now, the theory, because it's normally little bits and pieces of lots of different things. Take what works for you and leave the rest. So I'm really glad that you're bringing kind of shining a light on that, because again, this is why the language of freedom is so important. And even get curious of like your relationship with, for example, even whether it's anti this or pro this, and it's not this outsourced savior that we found it now, because it leaves you very vulnerable when you outsource your sense of security and safety like that.
Yeah. And those conditions, that conditional space, for somebody whose wounding is self-erasure, is a very dangerous thing.
Yeah.
If that is your default, what we will do is we'll say, okay, I'll just amputate this part of me that you have deemed unacceptable and unwelcome here, and I'll just learn to live without her,
Yeah.
But those of us who are lucky enough to have a very unruly, amputated, exiled part who's just like causes a fucking racket in the back, in the shadows, like, how dare you leave me behind? I'm going to come out in your dreams. I'm going to come out sideways. And I know that that's what happens, when I amputate or exile some part of me, because of the condition of the space I'm trying to fit into. She gets creative in getting my attention back, letting me know that something has been left behind.
Yeah. And you can see it's working with as opposed to against, and the different parts and ourselves and the world around us, and melting this us, them, good, bad, get rid of this needs to stop. And actually harmony, freedom is a lot of like, I was getting curious about like what freedom is like. It's a harmony. It's harmony is agreeing to disagree and working with as opposed to against. And that's with the body, with the world around us, and all of its lovely, interesting parts that go with it.
Oh, I love it, Jacqueline. There's, it's a fascinating area. It's also like full of turmoil. It's hard. There is, there is help, and of course, hope. There is hope. So tell us, for the person listening who's like, I want to check this out more. Tell us what we can do. Is Jerry still manning the phones? I've cried down the phone, Jerry.
You're not the only one, so have I.
Yeah.
It's good for a sense of purpose. No, Jerry is still manning the phones. So if you are someone who's listened to this and kind of go, "Do you know what, I'm not going to overanalyze it anymore. I feel a little bit uncomfortable. I'm going to check it out." You can contact us, marinotherapycenter.com. You can email, you can WhatsApp, you can send Jerry a voice note, you can call him. You can write us a letter here. The address is on the website. Whatever form of expression feels safest and more comfortable for you, it's all there. The Instagram, it's Marino Center. That will give you a sense of, even, Maria's on that mostly. I've grown. I'm not there at the moment so much. Sometimes I am, but even just to connect how we work, little different ways to contact there. And we've got one-to-one sessions. We have our reflection sessions. Everybody is welcome to join. That's on Zoom from 7:30
Yeah.
until 9, the last Tuesday every month. And you can come, you can have your camera off, on, share, listen, absorb. But just it's an opportunity for connection and just kind of maybe dip your toes in and see what you think. But keep it simple. And if you were
Yeah.
trusting yourself and you're being a best friend to yourself, maybe ask what way you'd approach it. So marinotherapycenter.com is where you're going to find there's weekly tips of the day, there's blogs, there's podcasts, there's resources there that you can support yourself, even if you don't feel the time is right for a one-to-one or even a group at the minute.
Yeah. And the podcast is called Calling It Out. It's available on Spotify and all the usual places. I'm really enjoying your Substack. We're
Thank
both
you.
on Substack, and I've been really enjoying the
Yes.
series that you've been doing lately, the 30.
30 learnings over 30 years. Again, Substack, the longer form, the audio, the reading, it just feels like a safer, more fun space at the moment. So the Calling It Out Substack, if you Google that, you can subscribe. And yeah, it's in between myself and Marie. Marie is kind of really committing to that at the moment. I'm dipping in and out. I'm finding my way with it all again. But yeah, there's plenty there just to even get curious and see what comes up for
Yeah.
you.
And then, of course, you have the retreats in Lanzarote.
We've got Lanzarote retreats. Yes, we have just announced our winter 2025 date. So that will be in November. So there's more information on the website. That's a really cool, it's hard to put into words if you actually read even people's reflections on their experience, to actually immerse yourself in the environment of Lanzarote and the elements and like the elements of recovery. It's really cool. So if you feel like that's something that you feel like you might want to treat yourself to a retreat,
Mm.
November 2025, the next Lanzarote trip. Yeah,
I would absolutely love to do that myself.
it's powerful.
Jacqueline, thank you so much for being here, for the work that you're doing in the world, for being, a sister from another mister on this path, of recovery, and for keeping the hope alive.
Thank you. And Amanda, thank you very much for, as I said, just even inviting me to come along. And yeah, I really appreciate being here. And as you said, just really passionate about the topic. So it's always a joy just to speak that freedom is possible. There is in a kinder, compassionate way.
Yeah,
So yeah, thank you so much.
yeah. Thank you, Jacqueline.